The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Alexa with Quest. Today we have minimizing time and effort in PeopleSoft updates using PTF. Our presenters are going to be Russ Barberio and Dan Croce from Sierra-Cedar. Before they get started today, I do have a few housekeeping notes for everyone. All of you are in listen-only mode right now, meaning you are muted during this session. So any questions that you have, please submit into the questions dropdown located on your GoToWebinar box. And at the end, Russ and Dan will take some time to answer those. This session is also being recorded and will be posted to the Quest content library. I'm going to be sending everyone a link to download the recording here in the next day or so be on the lookout for that. And I do see a couple people hopping on right now. So just letting you know you are in listen-only mode, but we do encourage questions, so please submit those in the questions drop-down, and we'll go over those at the end. So I think that Russ is going to go ahead and kick it off for us today.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in this starstruck presentation. Last time it was a hurricane that kind of postponed it, and today, unfortunately, I got back from lunch and the internet was down. I'm at the University of Georgia campus, and it was down pretty much campus-wide. But we managed to get up at least on the visitor one. The downside is that I was going to show a demo it was going to take about 7 minutes of our time, but that will probably be impossible at this time. So we'll have 7 minutes given back to us to do other things. And a little bit of introduction. I've been at the University of Georgia for the last year, working specifically on PeopleSoft Test Framework. And it's I'm more of a functional person, but with me is Dan Croce, who is the technical lead for a project of implementation of financials. And he has been the champion on the technical side of PTF. So we've been working together to get a usable system that works, and it's the time frame is a lot longer than we would normally use because we were going through an implementation at the same time. So during that time, I've developed with some help hundreds of scripts and have learned a lot of ins and outs on PeopleSoft Test Framework, and I hope to impart some of that to you. The specific goal today was to talk about minimizing time and effort in PeopleSoft updates using PTF, and we're going to talk about that, but first I'm going to first do a little quote that you see up there saying that Hayes Specialist Recruitment is recognized for implementing a successful selective adoption policy with the support of PTF, which drives significant savings in test effort and duration, such in their case, such as PO tracking using UAT testing, previously done by 2 experienced subject matter experts for 2 days, now automated to run in 8 to 10 days. Now, while this doesn't specifically talk about regression testing, it talks about UAT. From experience in helping with the implementation, we did use this for UAT to run certain tests over and over again, and certain tests that were very, very complicated beginning to end. Now, what we're going to cover today is a review of PTF's place in lifecycle management. Some of these slides I've used before in a live presentation at Quest, but we're going to go through that just to bring everybody up to speed on the same page. So we're going to talk about PTF and lifecycle management and how it relates to selective adoption and then regression test strategy. But then we'll get into the meat of it and why use PTF in this strategy for lifecycle management and selective adoption. So we'll cover the PTF lifecycle, tools and best practices, and responsibilities. And this when we get to this is kind of the meat of it. Who does what? And particularly between functional people, the business, and the technical people. come to a conclusion. Unfortunately, we won't see the demo. And then I guess Alexa's going to capture some questions, and hopefully we'll answer them now. Anything we don't get to, you feel free to send me an email, and either I or Dan can answer these from a functional or technical standpoint. And we just want to help you be successful in using this tool, which we believe is an integral part of a successful PeopleSoft update program. Lifecycle management is the broad brush that covers a lot of different things, which includes the update, and we'll cover that on the next slide. But as part of lifecycle management in PeopleSoft, we have selective adoption. Of course, that's the ability to bring on any enhancements, updates, whatever they're covering, and use the selective adoption process in the PeopleSoft Update Manager to selectively apply the things that apply to your situation. And the major part of selective adoption, and which has been I'll call it a bugaboo in the past, is the fact that any change you make requires regression testing, because the last thing we want to hear is, I didn't know that change was going to do that. And then PTF is a tool to help with that regression testing. It won't cover 100%, but a good goal would be at least 80% of the tests should be covered by PTF. So Lifecycle Tools, that includes the application designer, change assistant during anytime we're making a change, setup manager, which we're not going to talk much about here, and the update manager, which enables us to do the selective adoption. And selective adoption, it will allow us to put in new features, patches and fixes, regulatory and tax updates, tools updates, and it also includes PTF sample test cases and libraries. And these can be very important in your evolution of doing PTF, because although they just apply to the demo database, they'll give good examples of how to do certain functions. And I've learned a lot by looking at these test cases and libraries, and incorporated a lot of the information from them into the scripts that we have done here at UGA. So basically, in lifecycle adoption, we're going to get, Dan, there's 2 or 3 or 4 different updates per year we're talking about now.
Generally 4.
So, yeah, 4 updates a year, and a lot of organizations I've worked with say 1 is enough a year. Matter of fact, the parent company, the parent organization to the University of Georgia, said that they do 1, but they're looking to do more. And the reason that they only do 1, because it's a big impact to the system to not only apply these changes, to promulgate them out so that people can get used to them, but to test them to make sure nothing broke in the meantime. So we get the new image 4 times a year, and at that point you can determine what tailored change to the package that you need, the organization needs to make in order to apply what's absolutely needed to go forward. And then using the change assistant to apply the tailored change package, it goes into the chain of development, into test, into QA, and any other environments, and finally in production. And by the time it hits production, we want to make sure we have very little. I didn't know it was going to do that. So in the past, it's been quite laborious, and that's why, 1 time a year, and sometimes maybe even not that often. But the goal is to do it more often, because we as a organization determined that the more often that you use it, the easier it's going to be, and the more up to date it's going to be. So during selective adoption, you may determine whatever maintenance strategy you're going to have. In the past, we all are used to the major upgrades, from 9.0 to 9.1 to 9.2. Well, that's come to an end. There is not, PeopleSoft said there will not be any upgrades to the business processes. And everything's going to be delivered on a regular basis in these update management packages, but not as upgrades. And you can decide if and when to apply to get current. Sometimes you have to with critical fixes or legislative requirements and security vulnerabilities. New features and tools patches, determine whether those features are important to the organization now or perhaps later. And the main point is that on selective adoption, we've got to keep in mind that there are going to be regressions. Things are going to break. And we want to capture those regressions before they go into production, not after production. So the strategy is it's selective retesting of a system or parts of a system to verify that modifications have not caused unintended effects and that the system still complies with its specified requirements. Wow, hard to say. But again, regression testing is integral part, and we are going to make it easier by incorporating PeopleSoft Test Framework. And the important part with PTF is that regression testing must be thought of in the long term, not as a single cycle. There's no question there's a heavier cost up front. Scripts have to be developed. Testing has to be done. The bugs have to be worked out. It takes time. But once those scripts are solid, and Dan and I have had long conversations about this, that once we have a core of scripts, it's going to get easier and easier. And I'm not going to say lights out processing, but it's darn near close, that you could actually turn on and run multiple tests with one keystroke, and then do it overnight or have multiple systems doing it, come back and find out where your holes are going to be and where we need to do some work as far as shoring it up. So an regression test strategy approach needs to determine the approach, what tools are going to be used, and what standards for test cases. Very important to have naming conventions and notes that are part of those tests, that those that come after us can follow it and be able to understand exactly what we were trying to do. We have to understand that data is going to change. And one of the biggest reasons a test before an update might pass and then after an update may fail is changes in data. So we have to be cognizant of this and make the test as data proof as possible. And we have really tried hard to do that. We need to be very savvy in creation of test case or test cases. And what I mean by test case in this point is that we can run a test case in one scenario with one, let's say, array of chart field values. And then we might want to run it again with a second scenario or chart field values to see if special cases take place when those values change. We have to be very sure of our validation criteria. What is valid? What makes a valid test? What will be acceptable? And we have to be very clear on how we're going to run the test, where we're going to run the test, and what is the determination of success. So the best practices is create a test automation strategy. Automate testing as much as possible to apply updates faster. Take advantage of delivered integrations and optimizations. Treat your initial automated testing solution as an implementation. And that means that the first time you run through this, there needs to be a project plan. And use the Oracle delivered PTF test case examples where they apply. Take advantage of everything, and I can say from experience, read everything you can out there. You'll find that a lot of people have gone the same way and had issues, and they've resolved those issues. And there is good documentation, a lot of YouTubes out there. I was just looking at some yesterday. And I guess maybe for my own amusement, I like to look at those YouTubes and see what other people have done and how they've resolved some of the issues, and maybe not resolved them. Then it's important to have a good test plan and development standards to establish a centralized test instance. And we have some ideas on how that test instance can be migrated from one level of database to the next level, from development to test, and to be able to do those migrations and migrate the tests as well. Even though we'll probably see a little later that you can develop the tests in one instance, like development, and run them against another one like tests, without actually migrating the tests. But it's a good practice to actually migrate the tests and have a migration plan. Library organization, to be able to find the test. PTF has a very good way of categorizing the tests, so you can put them in folders and find the tests you're looking for. Naming conventions are very important because we want to be able to look at those tests and understand what a particular test does. Recording procedures and test development standards all have to be looked at. And then finally is test optimization and maintenance. That PeopleSoft apps, being dynamic and responsive, are able to build repeatable, auditable tests to integrate test optimization features and have reporting to reduce maintenance, and use the delivered export-import feature to rapidly create new tests. And I'm going to go one step further, is that Dan has been working quite a bit on developing tests and reports that are even more specific to an organization than the delivered ones. And we're going to see an example of that later. But the delivered reports are helpful, but specific reports, as we have developed, as Dan has developed, really zero in on the issues and help with the analysis of where we are in relationship to being able to create a test, run the test, and go live. So we determine the criteria, the system readiness, the exit criteria. What constitutes a pass or a fail? How do we validate the test results and have a consistent validation process that anybody can pick it up and understand what test failed and what one passed? And finally, it gives us the ability to quantify the risk. And everything is a risk. Nothing is going to be 100%, but the more we can make it close to that, the less our risk. And to do that, we bring in PTF in our regression testing tools. Why use PTF? Well, because it enables effective and cost-effective regression testing, and that's the only reason we use it. However, it really isn't, because we can use it for other tests, such as SIT testing or UAT, or even as a teaching tool. We've all seen the manual process. We start out, we build Excel spreadsheets, and sometimes it can be very sophisticated. Here at UGA, I was going to say USGA, that's the parent company. At UGA, we had very, very sophisticated spreadsheets that could not only track the testing, but also quantify it and explode and give some insight into the risk. But the problem with Excel spreadsheets is that it's inconsistent test data. As I was developing the scripts, and I was using system integration test scripts, some were very specific, some scripts were very detailed, and I was able to create good PTF scripts that were right on target. But other consultants or the in-house people developed scripts that weren't so tied down. Some that assumed a certain level of knowledge of the users. And these inconsistent tests develop inconsistent test data. And it becomes very labor intensive because if you're taking a number of people who are not as knowledgeable as maybe someone who developed the test, they're going to have a hard time developing it. And then the data that they use is not reusable. So what looks easier at first, manual testing, is actually much more difficult and will have to be redone in the future. With PTF, we can test more often. The business can drive the change. In other words, because we're doing this more often, the business can have a better say of what kind of changes they want to see and which ones they want to incorporate. It becomes a very empowering process for the business to know that they're not going to have to wait years to get something they want. It's going to change much more rapidly, and the deployments are going to be much faster because we'll be able to test a lot faster. And then certainly there's a higher level of quality because now we have consistent testing, we have very specific testing, and we have testing that will almost eliminate all regressions in production. I can't say 100%. Now, there's always going to be something there. So PeopleSoft Test Framework gives us these tools. Easy record and playback. There's a learning curve. I'm first to admit that my year of doing this, I've learned a lot, and I still am. I learned something yesterday that I never used before. I had a client reach out to me saying that we're using an event, what do we call it, an event scheduler. And when they logged in, there was a pop-up giving information about the environment they were in. And I had never seen where we can eliminate that pop-up and go further, go into the test. But it was there, we figured it out. And now I've learned something new and how to use what's called a mouse coverage, that you can actually use a facility that assumes you're going to have to use your mouse and click on something rather than any other way. It saves time and money. Not at first, there's no question, it's upfront. But there are ways, and we'll get to that, how to have you save time and money using the experience of others. It's totally integrated with PeopleTools. When a new version comes out, PeopleTools, the test framework is totally integrated, and changes are made to the tests that are already existing. It's an easy migration between environments. The environments, if you want to migrate from dev to test to quality and even to production, of course, you're not going to run the test in production, but to have them in production can be a beneficial use. Test maintenance and reports. It's easy to maintain tests once they're created. It's not rocket science. And the reports that come out, the generic reports, specifically the maintenance report and the coverage report, are pretty good. But Dan walked out of the room, and I'm going to say this guy created some reports specifically for the organization that's using it that are fantastic. And we'll be able to get a preview of what the tests are going to show, and we'll know when we're going to have a problem even before we run them. PTF has efficient automation that it works. It's built off the UPK engine that allowed copying specific steps, but it's gone a lot further than that. There are a lot of optimization tools built into PTF that would not be part of UPK. And then there's an integrated log of exceptions and results. And this is a totally auditable log that allows anybody to see what the history was and what the results were of any particular test cycle, and allows you to dump all of the data into an Excel spreadsheet and to organize the data to make it so that it can be readable and be used for any kind of analysis to make things better in the future. The PTF Lifecycle is simply following some 4 steps. Install and configure. There are some specific guidelines and gotchas that are in PTF. As of now, it still must be run on Windows 10. And in building the scripts, you can only use IE11. You can run it in Chrome or in Foxfire, but Firefox. Thank you. 90% of the time I get that wrong. But IE11 is what I work in. I started working on a Mac and found out quickly that was not going to work. So it works either on a local machine or on the what do you call it? VDI machine. Yes, and a virtual desktop. We actually do it in both of those. So the Oracle UPK pre-built content started out, and it created the environment for PTF. PTF has taken it a lot further, as I mentioned earlier. So once it's installed and working, and there are a few little quirks, like there's a batch fix file that's delivered that needs to be run, or it runs extremely slow. And how do I know that? Because for the first couple of weeks, I watched it run extremely slow until we found the non-documented feature saying you need to run this batch file as an administrator on your machine, and you need to set up your Internet Explorer options specifically for it to run. Once that's installed, then it's simply record and optimize. Create those tests. Record test cases. So you can have multiple flavors of the same test. You can run multiple tests inside of another, and including a shell test, which will allow you just to call other tests. That's all you can do. And then there's a lot of optimization tools that we will be talking about in a few minutes. Once the tests are run and you think you have covered everything that is required, then you go into the execute and analyze. You execute the tests either individually or all as a group, turn it on, and it starts to run. And then you can manage the results of those tests by looking at the logs and using Log Manager, which will summarize the whole experience of the test you just ran, and then you can view those in a log viewer. After the tests are run, and then part of the process is going to be, in the next slide, we'll look at that process, is there are two reports that are delivered. One is the test maintenance report, which says it will show you where a test is going to fail after you've applied the PUM that you're working on. And it works in a generic way. It doesn't know your particular environment, but generically it creates compare reports that allow you to analyze it. And this is where we're going to talk about later that we've customized that by using query to be able to be specific about our own environment. And the test coverage report is a report that says you have managed some objects in this PUM that are not covered by the tests. And if it's integrated with the usage monitor, you can even identify the most troubling areas where you have to create new tests for next time to make sure that you got coverage. And then you can upgrade those tests with the upgrade tool. And then finally, test, compare, and matrix reports so that you can see, what you've done, where you've been, and where you're going to go. It's only 4 steps, but there's a lot of training that goes on, a lot of learning that goes on, and there are resources that you can use to help you with that to make it a lot faster. So this is a slide that shows a graphic of how that all works. And Dan, why don't you this is your area, so.
Sure. So basically, to have this all work with PUM, you're really injecting a couple additional steps into the normal PUM application process. And one of those is to not apply the PUM in your target environment, but copy over just the project definition. So you can see what objects are coming over. And you not to be too detailed, but what you do is you basically are running a compare report to the database, so it has data to work against before you ever do the actual PUM upgrade. You're just copying over the project definition, so you have all the objects that will be touched. Copy it to a file, and then, or export it to a file, then apply your PUM, then do a compare report against the actual PUM project and the pre-PUM project that you exported.
Say that fast.
Yeah. So you have a way to compare the exact objects in a project, one upgraded, one not. And it writes the results to database tables. And that's the steps that you need to inject in the process. And once you do that, you just proceed as normal. But then what that gives you is the ability to do your maintenance, to run your maintenance report, run your coverage report, and do the analysis of what you will retrofit. Hopefully you'll stop and also use it to analyze what you can retire as a customization because some piece mod came through that you don't need it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that dual purpose that you want to not just slam it in, but to really analyze what you're doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So during the updates, changes are going to be made to application menus, components, pages, records, fields, any other objects. There could be a whole broad brush of objects that are going to be changed. And tests that are passed prior to the update may fail after the update because fields are renamed, deleted, or moved. For example, something I was going to show you, which I can't now, is that in the travel advance, in particular, in the fluid, the user interface, they had changed the comments field from at least the visible comments field from one that was a text field to a long text. And so that we knew was going to fail. It wasn't that they added a new one, but they just pointed the visual to a different field on a subrecord. And by seeing this in advance, we were able to determine that we're going to have a failure here unless we change the test. And so that was a case that of something we knew, but we want to find the ones that we don't know, the ones that are going to be a big impact. And so we've got to identify those. Menus change, etc. There's a lot of different things that will change in each of those updates. And one of the things that Dan mentioned is that it's a very valuable tool to determine what customizations can be replaced with new delivered functionality. And then we're given those two tools to identify the impact of those changes, the maintenance report and the test coverage report, which we talked about earlier. Again, maintenance says what will break. Test coverage says what was in the PUM that wasn't covered by a test. And therefore, we need to test that manually this time. And next time, we're going to add it to our repertoire of tests to make sure we cover that. The maintenance and coverage report process, it drastically reduces the expense and risk of testing because we don't have to retest everything again. We've done it prior to the PUM. We know what passed. We don't have to test it again because they will tell us, or better yet, the customized query reports that we've done will tell us more specifically and also relate every PUM object to a test or tell us where it's not covered. So we're doing dual duty there, and it's much easier to read. Now, the tests that are delivered are managed objects, and so PTF is able to validate objects against the PeopleSoft object metadata definitions, which that's what we're doing. We're doing through our query reports. And we can assertively verify the existence of test objects before running a test, rather than running the test to identify invalid objects by trial and error. This is whether it's the delivered reports or the customized query reports, this is the guts. This is where we really save money and save time and save resources and allow more time for analysis than just running reports and running tests. This is starting a list of best practices. There are a lot of optimization tools, but I kind of incorporated all that into what I consider best practices. First of all, keep your desktop simple. And by that I mean don't have a lot of pop-ups that are happening on the machine you're using, you're going to get some weird results. I know that from experience. All it takes is a pop-up saying that you can update this file now and it will interrupt the test. So try to keep it simple. I don't follow that practice entirely myself, but then I suffer the consequences. Adopt naming conventions. And in my case, I use the same naming convention as the system integration tests, so I can always relate them back to a physical copy. Very important to document the tests and test cases, and PTF gives you a lot of opportunity to document for each test case and for each step. There are lots of opportunities to document because you want the person that comes after you to be able to understand what the intent was of this test and what expectations you have. Record first and record all information possible to drive the test, including metadata, into the test. And along with that, and I highlighted the next one, is assertively record every step, even though information is pre-filled in. For example, if it automatically pre-fills in today's date, well, you want to assertively put that in because that date may change, and unless you're pretty fond of going back and rewriting, inserting new lines in your test, it's best to everything possible. Check boxes that are checked on or off, do them both, and then just at least have the checkbox there if it's automatically checked on. And along with that is repeat information when needed to drive into the test as checkboxes. That's what I just said. Deselect and then reselect. And then you can delete one of the lines. Explicitly add dates, talked about that already, to the test where specific dates are needed. Use the messaging tool to get information about a field. I didn't highlight this, but this is really, really an important part of PTF. There's a little tool that allows you to identify every field that is on in PeopleSoft that you're working with, so you can be sure that you're getting the right field and right address for that field. Very important little tool. The more you can call other tests in, the more efficient you're going to be. Library tests are ones that are doing the same thing over and over again. And so you can incorporate that with parameters. And an example of that is if let's say you want to bring in another login for another person, let's say for workflow approval or approval workflow. And so you want to see it. And the example I was going to give you today would have had that, is that you can just bring in one line with username and password, and you can go to that shell test or that library test, excuse me, the library test, and run that same approval process over and over again, using a different person each time. Use page prompting. Now the test is set up so that you can, or PTF is set up that you can go from one menu item to the next menu item to the next menu item until you get where you want to go. But if you use page prompting, it automatically goes exactly to the page prompt that you want to use. For example, if you're going to create a voucher, instead of going through that 4 or 5 different menu options, you can go right to add or update a voucher. Incorporate scroll handling. Many times, especially in Fluid, if you've ever worked with approval and Fluid, the approval page, depending on the approver, you may have different selections on the left-hand side. And sometimes they'll be in one position and sometimes another, depending on what selections you have. And so if you say, I want to go to the third one down, but the third one down, which may have been travel advances or travel authorizations or expense reports or any of the other things that are going to be approved, may or may not be there the next time you go through. But using scrolling, you can, it'll look for the name of what it's looking for rather than looking for the position. And then the next very, very powerful tool of variables. So like if you're creating a voucher and the voucher is saved and you have a voucher ID, you can put that voucher ID in a variable, and let's say you want to run approval on that voucher, you can use that variable ID and do the approval processing against that specific voucher ID. Saves many, many hours of time. My favorite part of this is talking about who does what. And I broke it down between the business responsibilities for PTF and IT responsibilities. So the business they're the ones that should drive the whole PTF process, determining the strategy and the scope, and determining what are we going to test and what test cases we need. They have to, the business then hands over to IT the detailed manual test scripts. This is starting out. When there are no test scripts, they need to give them to the IT, and IT is going to actually create the PTF scripts. But once everything is done, the business needs to review maintenance and coverage reports with IT or any of the other custom reports, and finally resolve any post-update issues with IT. But the business needs to be involved. You can't just leave it up to the technical people to determine the whole process. This is a business-driven process, and the business needs to determine what is to be done, how it's to be done, and then what to do with the results and how to resolve any issues. IT has a lot more items to do: set up and maintain the infrastructure, create the PTF tests and test cases. I'm often asked, well, why don't have the functional people do this? They're the ones that know exactly what needs to be done. And we all know there are techno-functional people, and certainly they could do, as a functional person, because of technology, they know how to do this. But the fact of the matter is that PTF tests are programming. Creating them is a programming language. It's very much in English and very understandable, but there are a lot of functions and features within PTF that make it more technical than it is functional. IT should maintain the tests and test cases because they're the ones that have to move them from place to place, either using a tool to migrate or to use Application Designer or whatever tool they're doing. And they should also add new tests and test cases as required and approved. And they're certainly going to manage the whole update process. That's IT. And they should run the pre-tests and fix any issues. That's any tests, getting ready for the new PUM. They should be running the tests. They should maintain the maintenance report, test coverage report, or any of the custom reports, and then resolve update issues with the business. And finally, to update scripts to increase coverage where necessary. I talked earlier about, there's a lot of things involved, but there's a lot of help out there. And that help can come in many different ways. self-study, taking the Oracle course either online or in person. I did that when I first started doing that, the online one. It was helpful, but like, Oracle classes will get you started, but it's only by doing and actually specific items that we actually start really getting trained. And the training, so go to training for either the end users or train the trainer situation, and get a library of standard scripts. Now, I've talked about the ones that are delivered by Oracle. There are many organizations, including Sierra-Cedar, which I work for, that have pre-done scripts that can go a long way to getting you started, both in HRM and financials. Keep learning. There's always something new. For example, in a release, Tools Release 856, there's going to be 3 significant items, or are 3 significant items. And one of them, really powerful, is that you can now run a query and use the results of that query in a subsequent script. So looking forward to getting an environment where we can do that. And then finally, in developing analysis tools, query-based, not generic, comparing the PUM objects with objects touched by the PTF scripts and identifying issues up front. And probably can't read this as well as I would like, but I did the best I could. This is actually one of the reports that Dan created, and it's much more readable than the delivered maintenance scripts, maintenance test. Well, I only got 5 minutes left, but I want to leave a little time for I can answer some questions, but including, PeopleSoft Test Framework, it's not required, but a good choice for automated testing for PeopleSoft. That's all it works for is in PeopleSoft. There's no cost to the tool. It comes with your system. It's integrated with PeopleTools, so there's no integration, and there's a lot of depth there. And it's part of a regression strategy, which is essential for selective adoption. And selective adoption is essential for an effective lifecycle strategy. We believe they should test as often as, and update and test as often as possible. PTF planning is business defines the policy, targeted areas and scripts. IT implements and maintains the tool. And above all, plan for the whole life cycle, not for one time. We're in it for the long run, and this is what PeopleSoft is all about now. And finally, there's lots of assistance out there. Ask for help, and you'll be much rewarded. Learn as much as you can. Go to those YouTubes. Everything is helpful. So I'm going to close off now and turn it back over to Alexa. Next would have been a demonstration. Unfortunately, I can't show that, and which included a lot of the optimization tools that we've talked about. Another time, another place.
Well, thank you so much, Russ. We have had a couple of questions come in. We will try to get to as many as we can, and anyone that does have any questions, feel free to submit those at this time, and I can send over any that we don't get to Russ, and he can reach back out to you. So go ahead and starting, let's see. Someone says, I think you said you were doing 4 PeopleSoft upgrades a year. What PeopleSoft modules do you have?
Well, now I'm specifically at University of Georgia. And they just did an implementation, a full implementation of finance, which was 10 different modules. I mean, it's all the core ones, plus, of course, billing and AR and grants management and projects, and this goes on and on. They're also doing an implementation of a new HCMS system. So our ideal is we want to do 4 a year, that's what we're shooting for the goal. The parent organization, University System of Georgia, has been doing one, and they said that it's not working well for them. And we're talking about implementing PTF for them as well. And they're covering 14 universities throughout Georgia. So the 4 is ideal. 2 would be adequate. We feel 1 is not enough.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. The next question, do you need UPK to use PTF?
No, you do not. UPK is what is the engine that they use for recording and playback when they started out. Now, my understanding is UPK is actually going away, but you do not need UPK. And again, the PTF takes that technology and enhanced it, and now delivers it with your PeopleTools, your PeopleSoft system, which UPK was an extra before. Right?
Okay, great, thanks. Next question. They say, I understand that load balancers are an issue with PTF. How do you address that?
I will have to take down that question and get back to it. Alexa, can you somehow send it to me? Load balancing is not something that's in my bailiwick.
No problem, no problem.
Dan would have been the guy to ask, and he had to catch a plane, so he left.
Okay.
So
no problem. After the initial implementation, how many FTEs do you have for the everyday maintenance and update of PTF?
We're using 2 full-time tech people, but our goal is to teach the whole tech team how to use, the analysts, how to use PTF, because we feel that knowledgeable people, they can come and go. Now, again, we're in a little different situation because we're just still in stabilization for the implementation. But our goal right now, we have 2 tech people who are learning the system, and I'm trying to impart to them everything I know.
Okay, sounds great. Let's just get to 2 more, and then any of these questions that we can't get to today, I will send over to you, Russ, and you can reach back out.
Sure.
How do we test well, actually, let's see, let's go to a different one. If the PTS script fails, can you retest since the data has been used?
That's a very good question. And I try to develop the tests in a way that we can run them over and over again. For example, on accounts payable vouchers, we know that if you run the same data multiple times, that it's going to bounce out because it's going to see it as a duplicate entry. So we've developed a formula to put in there for the invoice ID. So that's different every single time. So that's kind of a standard way of looking at it, that to make sure that anything that is would allow it to run and the tests think it's a different item, so it can run it multiple times. There are some cases where it gets a little tough, but I've always been able to figure out some way to run it multiple times, and it's a bit creative at times, but we make it work.
Okay, great. And the last question, how long does it take to implement PTF, and how long does an upgrade, or how long to do an upgrade with PTF?
I can answer the first part. And I would say that in a standard one where you have standard number of modules, let's say 6 or 7 modules, I would look to, if you get help and have knowledgeable people just to help with the implementation of PTF, you can figure on 6 months. That's a kind of a standard that we use. We have a lot of people who are inquiring about it and clients who are looking to use it. And we generally tell them about 6 months for a standard implementation.
Okay, awesome. Well, there were some questions we weren't able to get to, but again, I am going to send those over to Russ, and then he'll be able to reach back out with some of those answers. So, Russ, thank you so much for taking the time to present with us today. And a big thanks to Sierra-Cedar as well. Again, for everyone on the line, thank you for attending. And this was recorded and will be posted to the Quest Content Library. I will be sending out an email to each of you here in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for that. And thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your afternoon.